So this is a short video about how supply and demand curves work at a very basic level. I was recently pointed someone to YouTube to go find a tutorial for themselves on this matter, and found that really everything out there is just a little bit too complicated. And let me start by showing what too complicated means. Often you'll see online something like this, where the basics are explained. We're talking about a field that looks like this with price and quantity, and again, bear with me, this is the complex version. We're about to do this in a more simple way. And then you'll see someone explain that, well, really, you get something like a supply curve that looks like that, and you get something like a demand curve that looks like that, and you can find out that the market clearing price and quantity look as follows. There's something in here which is called consumer surplus, something in here which is called producer surplus, and then they start fiddling around with more advanced things. If there's an increase in demand, which is illustrated here, well, then the market clearing price becomes this. Sorry, the market clearing quantity becomes that, the market clearing price becomes this. Consumer and producer surpluses start to adjust, and basically, as you can see, it very quickly becomes a bit of a schmozzle. What I'd like to do in terms of making this more accessible is to explain the concept in very practical terms, a little less abstract. This clearly, let's just go back to this for a second, this clearly is an abstraction, and once you get what's going on here underneath the covers, then it can all make a lot of sense very quickly. But often, again, the way this is generally taught, it can take a while to get there. So what I'm going to do is actually suggest that we start off with a real example. We're going to assume that we've got a market for, I've chosen golf balls. And this is the market for golf balls in a particular location, which we're going to call Funville. And these are, again, the assumptions. Economists thrive on getting their assumptions on the table. Oops, sorry, let's make sure this is in view here. In this town of Funville, we're going to say we've got 20 golfers. That's going to be our consumers. And we've got 5 manufacturers, ball manufacturers. And that'll be the producers. So, so far, so opaque. What does this have to do with a supply and demand curve? Well, let's try and build these independently. And we'll start by building the demand side. So again, this is a visual representation of what's going on in Funville when the local golf town, let's say the store, has to determine how many golf balls it's going to order and what price it's going to sell them at. And again, the basics of the field in which we're working is that we have a vertical axis, which indicates what is the price that we're going to try and find out how far up or down we are here to get a price at which the golf balls that are produced can be sold. And then down here, we've got quantity, and that'll be the amount of golf balls that end up getting sold. And the first thing we're going to build here is the demand curve, the demand side. So the way that works is as follows. Let's assume we're gonna actually put a bunch of bars on here, each one representing one of our 20 golfers in this town. So we're going to say the first golf, and then we're going to arrange them on here with the golfer that's willing to pay the most will be at this side, and the golfer that's willing to pay the least will be on this side. So we'll take the first one, and this guy's fairly wealthy. This is how much he's willing to pay per golf ball because he loves golfing. Let's say he's willing to pay $20 per golf ball. And the amount he's going to want to order here, we'll say this is a scale. Let's say this goes up to 1,000. Let's say he'll take 50 golf balls at that point. So that's this one bar here, again, represents one individual who wants to purchase golf balls. The next individual is willing to pay, let's say, $19. And she's a little bit less of a heavy golfer. She, let's say, only wants 25 units. So this is 25. That now brings our total up to 75. As we move along this side, we're going to start adding up the quantities as we go. But she's only willing to pay $19. The next person we've got, let's say it's a family. They do a lot of golfing together. They actually want, let's say, 100 golf balls. So that's a much bigger volume. Our total volume is now up to 175. And they're willing to pay $17 a golf ball. So I'm not going to be pedantic about this. Let's just keep going and just keep adding people, families, and individuals. And at each point, we are, again, here's a really big family down here around the $10 market ball piece. And they're going to take 200 balls. And so on and so forth. So this is a real world example. If people were to place their orders, let's say with the golf store, before the golf store manager decides to order in balls, let's say they've each answered a survey and these are the responses they've given. Now, of course, in the real world, they don't give a survey, but also in the real world, each household or each consumer in the market does have some idea of what quantity they would buy and at what price maximum. Now, this does not look like a demand curve, or maybe it looks like the beginning of a demand curve. This is simplified, or this can be simplified by, let's just take the midpoint on each of these bars and link them up with a line. Now, it's pretty hard to see that at this point, but that line is our demand curve. And in fact, we can redraw that as follows. It'll start to look a little bit more like it looks in the textbook. Now I'm just going to write P for price and Q for quantity, so we don't need to keep writing it. There's our demand curve. And we'll just put a D on that to mean demand curve. So let's hold that just to one side. And now let's look at the supply side. So we've got the same field. We've got a price and quantity field. But this time what's happened is the Golftown store manager has asked, or the purchasing manager has asked these producers, how many golf balls are they able to produce, or are they willing to produce and sell at a given price? And we're going to assume here, again, economists love assumptions, that they're going to actually produce at a slightly lower price, but this is the retail price that the Golftown will end up selling at. So the first, let me explain what that means. The first producer is going to say, well, we can actually produce quite a lot. We can produce, let's say that number is 200, but this goes up to 1,000, not exactly to scale. Let's say that's 250. We can produce 250 golf balls, and we'd be willing to sell those at $5 a golf ball. The next producer says, well, we're not quite as big as these guys. We can't produce at quite such a low cost or quite the same quantity, but we can produce, let's say, another 200 at $8 a golf ball. And so there's their amount. The next producer says, you know what? If you can get us $10 a golf ball, we can give you maybe another 100. The next one says, if you can get this, so that's now 10, if you can get it up to $15 a golf ball. The next one says, we can produce 150. And then the last producer says, we can't really, we're basically primarily, say, in the tennis balls business, but we can produce a few up here at this level. So you can see what we're doing. Again, remember going back to our demand curve that looked like this. we're now looking at a supply curve that we can draw as follows. It looks like that. Or, to simplify it, and we're going to overlay it where we actually have the demand curve, we can have a supply curve that looks like that. So now, hopefully, these very smooth lines, which are maybe a little hard to understand if you just have them introduced to you without this kind of context, you can now see that there are real-world things going on. There's a real-world set of orders, and there's a real-world set of supply commitments that go to producing this view. And so the manager at Golftown can now say, okay, faced with that supply and demand, I can actually put them all together and figure out where they intersect and find out that if I order in this many golf balls, so at this point, remember, this is 1,000, let's say that that's 600 golf balls, I can sell those 600 golf balls at, let's say, $9 a ball. So now something, and that's a price. So now we've got the beginnings of, this is the basic concept, and if that's all you're looking for is the basic concept of how do supply and demand curves work, you can stop right here. But I'm going to demonstrate two things that you can do with a supply-demand curve from this point that are quite interesting. One is interesting in terms of it'll demonstrate how this can be used to make decisions. In fact, predictions, which is the key part of economics. Economics is trying to say, based on preferences that exist in a given market, this is microeconomics, based on how preferences exist in a given market, the micro part is that this isn't the whole world. This is just Funville, and this is just one product in that limited geography. That makes it micro. Within this world, what happens if things start to change? This is one bit of prediction, but let's see if something else happens, or let's see an example of such a change. So the example I'm going to use is what happens if it's actually a terribly rainy summer. And so if we go back to right here, our demand curve. It's a rainy summer, and some of these folks on this demand curve are actually fair weather golfers, such as myself, and they're just not going to play at all. They don't need any golf balls. So that will include, let's say, this family right here. We're going to be able to get rid of them. It includes these folks here, this group here, and so on. We get a bunch of folks who are simply going to say, we're not playing this summer. The net effect that has is to draw a new demand curve, right? So if you were to take out all of these pieces, actually let's just draw this. We're going to redraw the demand curve with our new, more limited group. And if you remember, the first demand curve kind of went there, and we'll just call that D1. That little sub 1 there, meaning it's just the first scenario that we're looking at. We're now going to draw another demand curve here. It doesn't quite catch everyone because, again, we're trying to smooth it out and show what the whole market looks like. We'll call that D2. We've had a shift in demand. It has gone that way. And what that is that's called a couple of things. Generically, any change is called a shock. When you're moving curves around, you're talking about what the shock is. So the demand shock here is we've had a reduction because of the rain, the rainy summer. We have seen a reduction in demand. And a reduction in demand will, because again, folks have disappeared from the market, the curve effectively shifts over this way. Another way, other examples of demand could be that let's say there had been a layoff at the local plant, or whoever pays for or provides income to a lot of the folks in Funville. That would be another reason why they might still want to play golf, but they're not willing to pay the same numbers, in which case you could have something like the original curve here, But instead of shifting this way because just some people have exited the market, actually all of them are still in the market, but their ability to pay has gone down. The net effect, of course, would look very similar. It would be a reduction in demand. So let's go back to this page and sort of see, okay, what happens, or what can we figure out about what's going to happen in the market when there is such a demand shock, such a shock happens. So we're going to call that demand 1. We've just shown how this will move this way if there's a reduction in demand because people are leaving the market. So we're going to draw in the second curve like this. And we've got now demand curve 2. So if you ever see one of these things, one of these a chart with various curves and there's these little subs to them, it basically is indicating just that one of them is your reference point and the next one is the one that you're then looking to see what happens. And this is the kind of thing you could have a question on a test about. So just to make things clear, we're going to take that original intercept, the original price and quantity, we're going to call that P1 and Q1. And this here, again, is what we call the market clearing point. By clearing, we mean that at the end of the period in which all these golf balls have been produced and then sold, is that there are none left. So that's the market clearing quantity, and that's the market clearing price over there. So what happens when we see this demand shock moving this way is we're going to see a new market clearing price and quantity. So let's just trace what these are. Now we've got P1 is there. This might be, let's say, $7 a share. P2 is there. Q2 is here. Let's say that's now gone down to 500 balls that will be sold. And what you'll notice here is that there is you can sort of see how if we were to predict at the beginning of summer that there was going to be rain, the store manager might say, okay, I only am going to order 500 balls and I'm only going to expect to charge $7 a ball for them. But here's the fun part. We're not going to get to this lower quantity because at the beginning of summer, that's when the supply was produced. We decided, or the store manager decided, he's going to order 600 balls and they're going to have to clear, or he's going to have to, he's going to order 600 and he thought he'd sell them at $9 a ball. But you can see now that with this supply being fixed, we now don't go to this point, we go in fact to this point. So let's say we had point A, our original market clearing price, point B there. That was the market clearing price had we had a forecast of what's going to happen during the summer. In fact, we're going to end up at point C, and point C is where somewhere where the price is even lower. Call that P3, call that $5 a ball. In order to sell these 600 balls, so the supply is fixed, but we've had a reduction in demand, the manager can now see that the price is going to have to go down to something lower. There's going to be a sale. And of course, we see this all the time. In stores, you see things that used to be $9 or maybe something that used to be $20 is now suddenly only 15 or maybe it's 10. It's because the supply is already there. Demand has gone down because, or there was maybe a misestimate of what the demand was going to be. And so therefore, in order to have a new market clearing price, we need to go a whole lot lower. I'm going to show just one more thing to complete this. So this is a key part in moving these lines around and figuring out the different points. A lot of a basic microeconomics course is understanding or being able to work with these curves and move them around and explain what's happening in the different contexts. I'm going to show one more thing though before we end this video, and that is this, because this is part of the basic theory of why the modern economies are able to deliver so much good in the world. Say our supply curve looks like that, our demand curve looks like that. And we are going to have a market clearing quantity there. That'll be our Q1. Make these ones and ones. And then over here, we've got a P1. That's our market clearing price. Now, let's look at this from two different perspectives in terms of what's going on in this basic chart. The first is the fact that we've got a bunch of people, let's look at the demand side, that were willing to pay all these higher prices. Let's say this is $10 here. And you got some people that were willing to pay $20 a golf ball. Well, if you're willing to pay $20 a golf ball and the price is only $10, you're getting a great deal. You're not having to spend $10 that you were willing to spend. And likewise, if you were willing to spend $15 or $12 or $17, you're getting a great deal. You only have to pay $10. You're not being pushed to your maximum that you were willing to pay. Accordingly, this whole area, if you add up all the people in here and you add up all the stuff that people were willing to pay but don't have to pay, that is what's called a surplus. And in fact, specifically, it's called consumer surplus. And this happens all the time in all parts of the world, and all these different little markets, I guess, for every single good and or service that's produced. It's always the case that the person who's paying exactly what they're willing to pay, they're not getting a deal. These people here we don't need to worry about. They're not even in the market. They've basically been priced out of the market. This is like the way I got priced out of the market for a Ferrari. Ferraris are just, no one's going to sell me a Ferrari for $25,000, even though I would certainly demand one if I could get one, because Ferraris are up here at $150,000. And so accordingly, with that being with that kind of delta, we don't need to worry about me down here. But all these consumers are getting a good deal, and that surplus is a significant gain to the whole economy. At the same time, we've got a bunch of folks here who are willing to produce and sell golf balls at much, much less than that $10 a ball. This guy here was willing to produce it at, this producer was willing to produce it, let's say $2 a ball, and $5 a ball, or $8 a ball. And so they're getting something else. Another kind of surplus is happening in here. It's surplus because it's a gain, basically. It's sort of more profit than they're actually seeking to make, or more revenue they need. And that's called producer surplus. So the size of these things, the relative size of consumer surplus and producer surplus, this is frankly the magic of a modern economy, is that you always have a situation in pretty much every market where, with some exceptions, where you're getting these two surpluses are coming into play. And because they exist, we have a better world than we would otherwise. And so that's why we're going to draw a happy face about these things. We'll have our guy looking over at those things and giving it, let's say, a thumbs up. That is a core part of the theory of what's great about modern economics, that this model of supply and demand curves helps us understand. And that will conclude this video. I hope it has been helpful for you. Thank you.